the question nobody asks. Honestly, is it truly possible to create happiness in the hardest moments of your life? Not the kind that arrives when everything finally falls into place, but the kind that lives inside you, regardless of what's falling apart around you? Most of us have never seriously considered this question. We treat happiness like a destination on a map we haven't finished drawing. We tell ourselves, one day, when things settle down, when the right person arrives, when the career finally takes off, then I'll be happy. We've been rehearsing that sentence for years, but here's what nobody tells you at the starting line. Life doesn't settle. It surges and retreats. It hands you joy and snatches it back. It builds you up and then, without warning, knocks you sideways. You wake up some mornings already exhausted before the day has even begun. You drag yourself through a to-do list that never shrinks. You manage expectations, other people's, your own, the world's, and somewhere in the middle of all that managing, you lose the thread of what you actually wanted in the first place. And then you scroll through your phone, you see the glossy, radiant lives of people who appear to have solved something you haven't. Their smiles are wide, their vacations are golden, their lives, from the outside, look like a solved equation. Meanwhile, you're still working out the variables. Maybe you've walked through heartbreak. Maybe life pivoted in exactly the opposite direction of your plan. And just when you're at your most worn down, someone appears, cheerful, well-meaning, and devastatingly unhelpful, to offer you this. Just think positive. Happiness is a choice. Look on the bright side. Is it really that simple? If it were, wouldn't every human being on Earth have cracked the code by now? That's exactly why this journey exists, because happiness doesn't belong only to the fortunate, the unburdened, or the people who appear to have everything figured out. It belongs to the ones who are exhausted and still standing, the ones who've fallen more times than they've counted, the ones who've lost their sense of direction but haven't yet lost that small, stubborn flicker inside. What you'll find here isn't a dream being sold to you. This isn't surface-level optimism dressed up in motivational language. This is a real, grounded, honest pursuit of lasting happiness, the kind that holds you upright when life gets genuinely hard. Not a performance of wellness, not a highlight reel of someone else's transformation. A navigation through your own. Because here is the truth that changes everything. Happiness is not the result of what you obtain. It is the way you manage your mind. When you are genuinely happy, not performing happiness but actually living from that place, everything shifts. You make stronger decisions. You recover from setbacks faster. Your relationships carry more weight and more warmth. You stop tolerating the things that drain you. And most critically, you stop merely surviving your life and begin at last to live it. Unhappiness, by contrast, turns everything into effort. Every task becomes a burden. Every interaction feels like a test you haven't studied for. Your energy depletes faster than it regenerates. You endure the things that should be changed. Life stops feeling like an experience and starts feeling like a sentence. This is why happiness is not a luxury. It is a necessity. But the happiness we're speaking of here is not the brittle kind, not the fragile good mood that cracks under pressure. We are talking about a deep, weather-resistant peace, the kind that keeps you standing in the middle of a storm. The wrong address. The single greatest mistake most people make about happiness is looking for it in the wrong location. We are absolutely convinced that happiness lives somewhere just ahead of us. Once I get that promotion, once I move to a better city, once I find the right relationship. Once I lose the weight, own the house, reach the number in my bank account. We set these targets with total sincerity, and when we finally reach them, something extraordinary happens. Nothing. Or rather, something does happen. A brief surge of satisfaction and then a slow, quiet return to baseline. The happiness arrives, stays for a visit, and then leaves without explanation. This is not a personal failure. This is the nature of external rewards. Because happiness is not obtained. It is constructed. It isn't delivered by circumstances, achievements, or other people. It is built by your perspective, your habits, and the way you relate to yourself. The outer world provides raw material. The inner world determines what gets built. Think of the joy you felt as a child. It wasn't complicated. A game in the backyard, a story read aloud, the smell of rain on warm pavement, the security of a hand reaching for yours. Before anyone told you that you had to earn the right to feel good, you simply felt good. Somewhere along the way, the world installed a condition. First achieve, then deserve, then feel. That condition is a lie. Real happiness is not the feeling that arrives when everything is going your way. Real happiness is the feeling that persists, quietly, stubbornly, even when things are going wrong. It is the stillness beneath the surface when the water above is rough. Like the ocean floor, which remains silent even when the waves above are wild and chaotic. That depth is the address of genuine joy. And the purpose of this journey is to help you find your way back to it. Not through temporary highs, a new gadget, a brief trip, a fleeting compliment, but through a lasting condition of inner sufficiency, something that travels with you, something that doesn't depend on today's news. Here is what this section teaches us. Happiness is not something you wait for. It is something you create. The temporary pleasures of life come and go, but deep inner peace, once cultivated, stays. You can find it in a small moment of gratitude, in a breath taken slowly, in a quiet smile offered to no one in particular. And most importantly, happiness is your birthright, not earned, not conditional. Yours, in any circumstance, at any stage, in any form of life. The only question is whether you know where to look. The architecture of perspective. Two people can pass through identical circumstances and emerge as entirely different people on the other side. One is broken by what the other is strengthened by. Same event, different experience. What accounts for the gap? One word, perspective. Not the events themselves, but the meaning you assign to them. That meaning shapes your emotions, which shape your decisions, which shape your entire life trajectory. Sometimes happiness feels impossibly distant, not because your circumstances are objectively catastrophic, but because you've convinced yourself that the circumstances must change. Before you're allowed to feel better, you think, I need a different job, more financial stability, less conflict, fewer obligations, and perhaps you're right that some of those things would improve your experience. But the deeper truth is this. The quality of your interior life is not primarily determined by the exterior conditions, it's determined by how you interpret those conditions. In the same world, two people can look at the same gray morning. One sees inconvenience. The other sees an excuse to stay in and read. The morning is identical. The experience is not, because interpretation is the bridge between reality and your response to it. The stories you tell yourself about your life become the architecture of your world. If you repeat day after day, I can never succeed at this, a part of your brain eventually stops trying. Because thoughts generate emotions. Emotions generate behavior. And behavior, repeated, generates destiny. Many people live as though their thoughts are direct broadcasts from objective reality. I am not enough. My life will never improve. Nobody truly understands me. These sentences, rehearsed over years, sink into the foundation of identity. They stop feeling like opinions and start feeling like facts. But they are not facts. They are habits of thought. These thought patterns often install themselves early. A teacher who dismissed your ideas, a parent who, without meaning harm, consistently noticed your failures more than your strengths, a peer group that made you feel like an outsider. The comments that seemed small at the time left marks in the architecture of your self-perception, and fused together over years, those marks become beliefs. Here is the critical insight. Beliefs are not truths. They are sentences repeated so often they feel true. A brain that repeatedly rehearses "I always fail" will begin to interpret ambiguous situations through that lens and will subtly arrange behavior to confirm it. But the same brain, exposed consistently to the perspective "I can navigate difficulty," will begin building new neural pathways that support that belief. This is not wishful thinking. This is the science of neuroplasticity, the documented ability of the brain to rewire itself based on the thoughts we practice. Negative bias is a real phenomenon. Researchers have confirmed that human brains are wired to register threats more powerfully than rewards, an evolutionary inheritance from ancestors who needed to detect danger faster than they needed to appreciate beauty. Your prehistoric ancestors who ignored the rustling in the bushes didn't survive. Their nervous systems passed caution down to you. But in the modern world, this same mechanism turns a colleague's brief frown into, "They must despise me. I'm probably going to lose this job." The alarm system misfires constantly, and the only way to recalibrate it is to consciously practice interpreting the world with more accuracy and more compassion. This begins with noticing. Pay attention to the internal monologue running in the background of your day. What words does it use? Is it a prosecuting attorney, constantly building a case against you? Or something more like a coach, direct about failure but equally willing to acknowledge what's working? When a difficult moment arrives, try asking yourself, is this actually as bad as my immediate reaction suggests? What evidence supports my interpretation? Is there another way to read this situation? A colleague responds to your message with 2 words instead of a paragraph. Your nervous system registers offense. But what if they're simply overwhelmed? What if the brevity is about their afternoon, not your worth? Pausing before the catastrophic interpretation doesn't just protect your emotions, it protects your relationships. Gratitude practice is one of the most powerful recalibrators available. Every morning, naming 3 specific things you're genuinely grateful for, not abstractly, but concretely, trains the brain's attention toward what is present and working. The coffee still warm in your cup, the fact that your body got you to work, the text message from someone who thought of you. The brain learns to scan for good rather than defaulting to threat detection. Single-focus attention is another essential tool. The modern mind carries dozens of open tabs at all times: anxieties, plans, regrets, projections. That cognitive load generates stress even when nothing external is actually wrong. Developing the capacity to be present to one thing at a time, the meal, the conversation, the walk, is not a spiritual luxury. It is a neurological necessity. When your perspective shifts, the world doesn't change, but your experience of the world does. The question that once was, "Why does this always happen to me?" becomes, "What is this asking me to learn?" The declaration, "I cannot bear," this becomes, "This is difficult, and I can bear difficult things." And that shift, so apparently small, so quietly fundamental, doesn't just change how you think. It changes how you feel, how you move through the world, and what you're capable of building in it. Be gentler with yourself. Learn to make peace with your mistakes, your gaps, your history. The voice inside your head is the voice you hear more than any other human being's. Choose what it says carefully. Ask yourself, if a close friend spoke to me the way I sometimes speak to myself, Would I let them stay in my life? The outer world is not in your hands, but how you interpret it is entirely yours. And sometimes, the most consequential shift available to any human being is simply a new way of seeing. The anatomy of stress. Stress is inevitable. Build all the systems you want, prepare every contingency, and life will still find a way to surprise you. The deadline that can't be met, the rupture in a relationship you thought was solid, the expense that appears without warning, the doctor's call you didn't expect, or simply the accumulation of everything at once, the morning when the pressure doesn't build gradually but arrives already at full volume. When that happens, you recognize the sensation, the chest that feels tighter than usual, the mind that can't stop running its disaster scenarios, the smallest tasks acquiring disproportionate weight, and from somewhere inside, the voice, "I can't keep up. I'm not built for this. Why is it always this hard?" Stress has a specific quality that distinguishes it from ordinary difficulty. It doesn't just affect what's happening outside you, it shapes the sound of what's happening inside. The external event and your mental response to it combine to determine the actual experience. Two people under identical pressure can have entirely different internal weather. One stays focused and functional, the other spirals. The difference is not in the stressor, it's in the interpretation. First, an important reframe. Stress itself is not the enemy. In appropriate doses, stress sharpens attention, drives performance, and mobilizes energy. The pressure you feel before a significant presentation isn't sabotage. It's your system preparing to be useful. The urgency before a deadline can produce your best work. Stress, in these contexts, is a productive companion. The problem is chronic stress, the kind that never lifts, the steady background hum of pressure that erodes the nervous system over months and years, the exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure. This is where stress transforms from signal to damage, and that's the crucial distinction. Stress is a signal, not a sentence. Like physical pain, which tells you something is wrong in the body, mental and emotional stress is an alarm. Something needs your attention. You are overloaded. Something has to change. The wise response to an alarm is to listen to what it's announcing, not to silence it by piling more weight on top. But we silence it constantly. We push through. We add one more commitment. We work through exhaustion rather than stopping to investigate it, and eventually the system that was trying to tell us something important runs out of ways to be heard and begins to collapse instead. Distinguishing controllable from uncontrollable factors is the first critical step in navigating stress. An enormous portion of our cognitive energy is consumed by things we have zero influence over. How someone else chose to respond to us, what happened last Tuesday, what might happen 3 years from now, whether traffic is cooperative, what the weather has decided to do. Attaching mental effort to these factors is not problem-solving. It is energy drain. The redirecting question is, what is actually within my reach right now? What is the next real action available to me? This question does two things simultaneously. It retrieves a sense of agency, which is one of the most powerful stress reducers known to psychology, and it simplifies the landscape. Instead of a vast, uncontrollable chaos, suddenly there is one small, manageable thing to do. Writing as mental architecture. The mind carrying 20 active concerns simultaneously is performing the cognitive equivalent of running 20 programs at once on a laptop that needs only 3. Everything slows. Everything overheats. The solution is not to work harder inside the clutter. It's to clear the clutter. Writing thoughts down externalizes them. Once a concern is on paper, the brain no longer needs to hold it in active working memory. The weight of carrying it dissolves. What remains is visible, finite, and addressable. This is also why journaling functions as emotional release, not just organizational tool. Seeing what you're actually thinking, as opposed to experiencing it as a blur, creates a critical distance. You become the observer of your anxiety rather than its host. The body as stress partner. Stress doesn't stay in the mind. It relocates to the body. The clenched jaw, the tight shoulders, the shallow breath, the elevated heart rate, the digestive system that knots itself in the middle of important meetings. The body is not separate from the stress response. It is part of its architecture, which means that interventions in the body have direct effects on the mind. Deep breathing is the most immediate and available of these. A simple practice: inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 6. Repeat several cycles. This is not a placebo. The extended exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch of your nervous system responsible for calm and recovery. It sends a literal neurological message to the threat detection system. The danger has passed. The body relaxes its emergency protocols. The mind becomes less reactive. Movement, walking in particular, performs a similar function. The bilateral rhythm of walking has been documented to reduce rumination and restore cognitive clarity. Something about putting the body in motion releases the mind from its loops. Small wins as momentum. When the scope of a problem feels paralyzing, the temptation is to wait until you feel capable before acting. But capability rarely arrives in advance of action. It arrives as a consequence of action. When you feel locked, make the smallest possible move available. Reply to 1 message, make 1 phone call, clear 1 surface. These micro-completions send the brain a signal it takes seriously. I am capable of doing things. That signal, reinforced repeatedly, becomes momentum. The mountain doesn't need to be climbed today. Dislodging the first stone is enough. Boundaries as stress prevention. A significant and underappreciated source of chronic stress is the habit of saying yes when the honest answer is no. Accepting more than your capacity can hold. Making yourself responsible for other people's emotional states. Measuring your worth by how accommodating you can be. All of this depletes, not dramatically, but steadily, the way a slow leak empties a tank you thought was full. The capacity to say no, clearly, without lengthy justification, without excessive apology, is not selfishness. It is maintenance. Ask yourself, is this something I genuinely want to do? Does agreeing to this cost me something I can't afford to give? These are not selfish questions. They are the questions of a person who understands that a depleted individual cannot sustain meaningful contribution to anything. Finally, protect the practices that restore you. Whatever those are, reading, cooking, hiking, playing an instrument, sitting somewhere quiet with nothing required of you. These are not rewards earned after productivity. They are part of the infrastructure of a functional human life. Treat them accordingly. Stress will always exist. Life's nature guarantees it. But you are not obligated to let stress manage you. Your interpretations are available for revision. Your breath is always within reach. Your small next actions exist right now, and the distance between being consumed by your circumstances and navigating them with some degree of grace, that distance is built, 1 choice at a time. The voice that holds you back. There is a voice inside most of us that speaks with remarkable confidence and almost no accuracy. It announces itself at the worst possible moments, when you're about to take a meaningful risk, when you're standing at the edge of something new and unfamiliar, when you've finally gathered enough courage to try something that actually matters to you. That's precisely when the voice leans in and says, "You're not ready for this. You've failed before. Look at everyone else. They're so much further ahead. What makes you think you're the exception? We've listened to this voice for so long that we've stopped questioning it. It has become the background frequency of our inner lives, not a visitor but a resident. We accept its pronouncements the way we accept the weather, as something we have no power to change. But here's what that voice actually is. It is not your instinct. It is not your wisdom. It is not an objective assessment of your capabilities. It is an accumulation of every criticism absorbed before you were old enough to evaluate it, every comparison made in an environment that didn't see you clearly, every moment you reached for something and were told, directly or indirectly, to reach lower. A teacher who marked your work with more red than encouragement, a parent who, without malice, consistently pointed to where you fell short, a social group that made belonging feel conditional. These experiences don't simply pass through. They lodge themselves in the architecture of self-perception, and over years they calcify into something that feels like identity. The gap between how you appear to the outside world and how you experience yourself from the inside is one of the most quietly exhausting things a human being can carry. People may describe you as capable, even inspiring. Yet inside, you feel like someone performing competence rather than actually possessing it. You accept the compliment with a smile and a private disclaimer. They don't know the whole story. This is not rare. It is, in fact, one of the most common human experiences, the sense that your internal truth doesn't match the version of you that other people see, and the exhaustion of maintaining that gap, of wearing the presentation while carrying the doubt, accumulates silently over time. The first step in changing this is not positive thinking, it is accurate observation. Begin by catching the voice in the act. When it says, "I can't do this," pause and ask, is that a fact, or is that a fear wearing the costume of a fact? These are different things. Fear speaks with tremendous authority and very little evidence. It borrows the language of certainty to describe outcomes that have not yet occurred. Examine the claim. What evidence do I actually have for this? What has happened in the past when I've faced something difficult? What might I be ignoring in this assessment? Most of the time, an honest audit reveals that the catastrophic prediction rests on very thin foundations. The second step is restructuring how you respond to failure. Imagine that a close friend makes a significant mistake, professional, relational, personal. What do you say to them? Most people would say something like, "These things happen. What matters is what you learn from it. One mistake doesn't define you." They would speak with kindness, with proportion, with genuine care. Now, recall the last time you made a significant mistake. What did your inner voice say? The gap between how we speak to people we love and how we speak to ourselves is often enormous, and enormously consequential. The voice you hear most frequently is your own. The person most shaped by your words is you. If your internal language is prosecutorial, the court of your own mind will find you guilty on a daily basis. Learning to apply to yourself the same quality of compassion you would offer a friend is not softness. It is not making excuses. It is psychological accuracy. Recognizing that harsh self-judgment is a poor motivator and a terrible guide. Research consistently shows that self-compassion, not self-criticism, is associated with greater motivation, higher resilience, and better performance over time. The third step is understanding that confidence is built through action, not through feeling ready. The most common misconception about confidence is that it precedes action. We wait to feel capable before we begin. But confidence doesn't arrive before the attempt. It is generated by the attempt. Every time you do something despite uncertainty, you add a small deposit to the account of self-trust. Every time you take the action you were afraid to take, the action gets slightly less frightening. This means the solution to low confidence is not to think yourself into a better feeling. It is to act, specifically to take the smallest available action in the direction of what matters, and let the feeling follow. Start with challenges small enough not to paralyze, but real enough to matter. Start a conversation you've been avoiding. Share an idea in a meeting. Begin the project you've been postponing. Each of these is both an outcome and an investment. Each builds the quiet internal knowledge. I am the kind of person who moves. Your environment shapes your interior. The people around you are not neutral. They function as mirrors, as amplifiers, as architects of your mental atmosphere. Spend extended time with people who diminish, compare, and critique, and your internal voice will gradually adopt their register. Spend time with people who are genuinely curious, who support without agenda, who see your potential as something real rather than theoretical. And something in your inner life begins to shift accordingly. This is not about avoiding challenge or difficulty. Honest, thoughtful feedback from someone who respects you is one of the most valuable things available. But there is a categorical difference between feedback that helps you grow and an environment that steadily convinces you that growth isn't available to you. Document your evidence. The mind, wired toward negativity, keeps detailed records of failure and poor records of success. It remembers the presentation that went wrong and forgets the 20 that went right. It catalogs the relationship that ended badly and underweights the ones that sustain you. This is not accurate accounting, it is biased accounting, and it distorts your sense of who you are. Periodically ask yourself, what have I actually navigated? What difficulties have I come through? What have I managed to create, repair, or endure that I didn't know I could? Write it down. Look at it. This is not vanity. It is corrective data. When the voice of doubt rises, these records are the counter-evidence. Here is the deepest truth about confidence. It is not the absence of doubt. It is the willingness to move forward in the presence of doubt. The voice that questions you will likely always exist in some form. The goal is not to silence it permanently. The goal is to reduce its authority over your decisions, to hear it, acknowledge it, and choose your direction anyway. Because the world on the other side of the voice is larger than the voice wants you to believe. The resilience. Within life does not offer a bypass route around difficulty. Every human being, without exception, will encounter loss, failure, rupture, and grief. The question has never been whether these experiences will arrive. The question is always, what do you do when they do? Some people are broken by what others are shaped by. Some emerge from the same fire diminished. Others emerge transformed. The difference is not luck. It is not privilege of circumstance. It is something more interior, more trainable, more within reach than most people realize. That difference has a name: emotional resilience. Resilience is not armor. It does not protect you from feeling pain. The resilient person grieves. The resilient person gets knocked sideways. The resilient person feels the weight of loss exactly as heavily as anyone else. What distinguishes them is not immunity to difficulty. It is the capacity to move through difficulty without being permanently defined by it. Think of a tree in a storm. The branches bend dramatically, sometimes violently, but the root system holds. The tree doesn't resist the wind by being rigid. It survives the wind by being flexible. Resilience works the same way. It is not the refusal to bend. It is the ability to bend without breaking and to straighten again when the wind passes. The meaning you assign to difficulty determines its impact on you. This is the central mechanism of resilience, and it is within your control. The same job loss can be interpreted as, I am fundamentally inadequate and this proves it, in which case it damages your self-concept, reduces your motivation, and makes the next attempt feel impossible. Or it can be interpreted as something in this situation wasn't working, and this is an opening, however painful, toward something different, in which case the same event becomes, eventually, useful. The event is identical, the meaning is chosen, and the meaning determines the emotional aftermath. This doesn't mean you perform optimism you don't feel. It means you remain open, even in the worst moments, to the possibility that more than one interpretation is available, that what looks like an ending may be the beginning of a correction, that pain, as terrible teachers sometimes are, may be delivering something you need. Emotional suppression is not resilience. It is delay. A significant number of people believe that strength means not feeling, that the way to get through difficulty is to keep moving, keep performing, keep presenting the appearance of being fine. This approach works briefly and accumulates catastrophically. Suppressed emotion doesn't dissolve, it relocates. It appears as physical tension, as irritability that seems disproportionate to its trigger, as a vague, persistent heaviness that never quite resolves. The grief that wasn't permitted to be grief becomes something else entirely. Real resilience begins with an entirely different premise. I am allowed to feel this, not performing the feeling for an audience, not dramatizing it for effect, simply allowing it to exist. Being present to your own interior experience without judgment, without the rush to fix or escape it. Ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? This is the foundational question of emotional literacy. You cannot navigate what you cannot name. Anger, fear, grief, shame, loneliness. Each of these has a different texture, a different route, and a different path through it. Treating them all as the same undifferentiated bad feeling is like trying to repair a car without distinguishing between the engine and the transmission, the temporary nature of all emotional states. No feeling, however consuming in the moment, lasts forever. This is one of the most important things the human mind can learn, and one of the most stubbornly difficult to remember when the feeling is at its peak. When you are in the depth of grief, the pain feels permanent. When anxiety reaches its crescendo, the certainty that this will always be this bad feels absolute. But every emotional state, without exception, moves. It rises, reaches intensity, and shifts. The emotional weather changes, always. This doesn't make the difficult moments less difficult, but it changes your relationship to them. Instead of this will always be this way, the more accurate thought is, this is where I am right now, and this will move. That distinction, small in words, enormous in practice, prevents the feeling from becoming your final verdict on your life. Breath remains your most immediate tool. In moments of intense emotional activation, the physiological reality is straightforward. Your nervous system has triggered an emergency response. Heart rate elevated, breathing shallow, attention narrowed. The system has decided there is a threat to be handled. Deliberate breathing interrupts this sequence at the physical level. A slow, extended exhale signals to the nervous system that the emergency is past. The body begins to exit crisis mode. The mind gains the fraction of space it needs to move from reactive to responsive. This is not mysticism, it is physiology, and it is available to you at any moment, in any circumstance, at zero cost, building flexibility into your thinking. Rigid thinking, the kind that insists there is only one way to interpret a situation, only one path forward, is among the most significant vulnerabilities of the human mind under stress. When the one interpretation collapses or the one path closes, the rigid thinker has nowhere to go. Resilient thinking is flexible. It holds multiple possibilities simultaneously. It asks, what else might be true here? What alternative approaches haven't I considered? If I knew I couldn't fail, what would I try? These questions don't produce certainty, but they produce options. And options are what the mind needs most when it feels trapped. Connection as infrastructure. Resilience is sometimes described as a solo achievement, the lone individual who persists against all odds. But this is a myth. The research is consistent. Social connection is one of the strongest predictors of how people cope with adversity. The presence of someone who genuinely sees you, hears you, and remains present through your difficulty is not a supplement to resilience. It is one of its foundations. This doesn't require an extensive network. It requires depth, not breadth. One or two people who know your real situation, who don't require you to perform okayness, who say, "I'm here and mean it." This is an enormous resource that too many people either undervalue or don't believe they deserve. Allowing yourself to be supported is not weakness. The willingness to let someone be present with you in difficulty is one of the more courageous things available. Hope as an active practice. Hope is not optimism. Optimism is a general orientation toward positive outcomes. Hope is something more specific. It is the decision to keep moving even when there is no visible proof that moving will help. It is choosing action in the absence of certainty. In the darkest periods, hope often doesn't arrive as a grand feeling. It arrives as a small action. Making the bed, opening a window, taking a walk around the block. These things seem trivial against the scale of real suffering. They are not trivial. They are declarations of continuity, signals that some part of you has decided to remain in relationship with your own life. Each small action in a hard time is a form of courage. Each one rekindles something that despair tries to extinguish. Emotional resilience does not promise you comfort. It does not make the difficult things less difficult. What it offers is something more durable, the knowledge that you can move through hard things without losing yourself in the process. Every difficulty you have survived has already demonstrated this to you. You simply need to believe the evidence. The discipline of gratitude. The mind has a preference for the negative. This is not a character flaw. It is an architectural feature, a survival mechanism built across millions of years of evolution. The ancestors who paid close attention to threats stayed alive. Their caution became your wiring. In the modern world, this same wiring scans constantly for problems. It registers the insult, but not the compliment. It dwells on the meeting that went poorly and glosses over the dozen that went well. It notices the one relationship under strain and overlooks the several that are solid. Not because you are pessimistic by nature, but because your brain is doing what brains have always done, protecting you by keeping the threats visible. The cost of this default setting, in a world where most threats are not predators but perceptions, is a chronic undertone of dissatisfaction. A persistent, low-level sense that something is missing, something is wrong, something needs to be fixed before you can relax. Gratitude is the deliberate interruption of this default. Not gratitude as a platitude, not the forced positivity of pretending that difficulty doesn't exist. Gratitude as a disciplined practice of attention, training the mind to notice what is present and working alongside what is absent and broken. Real gratitude doesn't require ideal circumstances. It requires the willingness to look carefully at circumstances as they actually are and find, within them, something real to acknowledge. Even in difficulty, especially in difficulty, because anyone can feel grateful when everything is going well. The practice of finding something worth appreciating on a hard Tuesday, when the project has stalled and the conversation with someone you love ended badly and the day feels like a series of closed doors, That is where gratitude becomes genuinely transformative. The neuroscience is persuasive. Consistent gratitude practice has been documented to increase activity in the prefrontal cortex and strengthen the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, the pathway that governs emotional regulation. Simultaneously, it reduces cortisol levels and increases the availability of serotonin and dopamine, the neurochemicals most directly associated with well-being and motivation. This means that gratitude is not simply a nice-sounding idea. It is a biological intervention. A regular gratitude practice changes the chemical environment of your brain, literally making it more capable of experiencing positive emotion, more able to regulate stress, and more inclined to notice opportunity rather than defaulting to threat. How to build the practice. Gratitude, like most meaningful capacities, does not develop spontaneously. The momentum of daily life doesn't naturally create pauses for appreciation. It must be deliberately created. The most well-documented method is the gratitude journal. Each morning or evening, write down 3 specific things you are genuinely grateful for. Not abstract things, not my health or my family in general, but specific, concrete moments or details. The particular quality of light through your window this morning. A message from someone who was thinking of you. The fact that your body, despite its imperfections, got you through the day. The warmth of a meal you didn't have to earn. The specificity matters. The brain responds to detail. Abstract gratitude slides off. Concrete gratitude lands and sticks. And over time, as you develop the habit of mining your daily experience for specific things worth appreciating, something shifts in the baseline orientation of your attention. You find yourself noticing beauty and sufficiency in places you previously overlooked. Expressed gratitude multiplies. There is a particular power in telling someone, directly, specifically, sincerely, that they mattered. What you said last week stayed with me. I appreciate how you handled that situation. You didn't have to help, and you did, and I want you to know it made a difference. These are not trivial social gestures. They are meaningful acts of acknowledgement that benefit both the person receiving them and the person offering them. Expressed gratitude deepens felt gratitude. It reinforces the neural pathways associated with appreciation. It strengthens relationships. It reduces the isolation that comes from being surrounded by significance you haven't named. Finding meaning in difficulty. One of the more sophisticated expressions of gratitude is the capacity to find something worth acknowledging, even in painful experiences. This is not toxic positivity, not the insistence that everything happens for a reason or that pain is secretly a gift. It is something more honest, the recognition that difficult experiences, however unwelcome, sometimes carry information that comfortable ones cannot provide. A loss teaches you something about what you actually valued. A failure illuminates a gap between where you were and what you were capable of. A rejection redirects attention toward a path that turns out to be better suited to who you are. None of this means the loss, failure, or rejection was good. It means that within it, something real can sometimes be found. The question shifts from "why is this happening to me?" which assumes the situation is a punishment, to "what is this asking me to notice?" which assumes the situation may be information. When gratitude feels far away, there are periods when nothing in this framework feels accessible, when the weight is too heavy, the exhaustion too complete, the loss too recent. In those moments, forcing gratitude is neither honest nor helpful. In those moments, begin smaller than small. Not "what am I grateful for today?" but "what is one true thing I can acknowledge right now?" The fact that you took a breath, the fact that you are still here, the fact that you asked the question. These are not grand gestures. They are small acts of witnessing, of remaining present to your own existence when everything in you wants to disappear into the difficulty. And they are enough, because the practice doesn't require a certain intensity to be real. It requires only that it be genuine. Gratitude changes your relationship with enough. One of the quietest but most profound effects of a sustained gratitude practice is the gradual erosion of the sense of chronic insufficiency. The feeling that you don't have enough, aren't enough, haven't achieved enough. This feeling, so pervasive in modern life, is not primarily a reflection of your actual circumstances. It is a product of where your attention lives. When attention consistently focuses on absence, on what is missing, what hasn't been achieved, what others have that you don't, insufficiency becomes the ambient feeling of your life. When attention is trained gradually and consistently toward what is present and working, the experience of your life begins to change, not because your circumstances have improved, but because you have become better at seeing what was always there. This is one of the most available and most underutilized forms of inner freedom. The capacity to feel genuinely satisfied not because you have everything you want, but because you have learned to see what you already have. The architecture of inner peace. Most of us have been taught, implicitly and relentlessly, that peace is a destination, that it exists somewhere ahead. On the other side of the solved problem, the finished project, the repaired relationship, the achieved goal. We run toward it with extraordinary dedication, and every time we get close, it seems to move. The finish line repositions itself. The conditions for peace are never quite fully met. There is always one more thing to resolve before we allow ourselves to rest. This is not a personal failure. It is a design error in the way most people conceptualize peace. We treat it as an outcome when it is actually a practice. We look for it in circumstances when it lives, persistently and patiently, in the quality of our attention. Here is the truth that changes the search entirely. Peace is not waiting for you in the future. It is available to you now, in this moment, exactly as your life currently stands. Not because your life is without difficulty, not because the problems have resolved, but because peace is not the absence of turbulence. It is the presence of a stable center within turbulence. It is the stillness beneath the surface of a lake while the wind moves across the top. The wind does not disturb the depths. The depths remain. And that stillness, that remarkable, accessible stillness, is what we are talking about when we talk about real peace. The most fundamental obstacle to inner peace is the mind's compulsive relationship with what should be. The internal narrator runs a constant commentary. If that situation were different, I could relax. If that person behaved differently, I could let go. If that problem were resolved, I could breathe. This is the negotiation the mind conducts with the present moment, always conditional, always deferred, always pointing toward a peace that will arrive once the conditions have been met. But conditions are never fully met. Life is a continuous arrival of new variables. There is no static moment when everything is perfectly arranged, which means that a peace dependent on perfect arrangement will never come. Acceptance is the doorway, not resignation, not the defeat of someone who has stopped caring. Acceptance is something more precise and more active than either of those. It is the decision to stop fighting reality as it is and to work with it as it is. It is the recognition that enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy are consumed by resistance, by the insistence that what is happening should not be happening, and that this resistance rarely changes the situation but consistently exhausts the person. When you accept a difficult reality, not with approval, not with indifference, but simply with clear-eyed acknowledgement, something in the body and mind releases. The resistance dissolves. What remains is not defeat. What remains is clarity. And clarity, unlike resistance, can actually produce useful action, releasing the illusion of control. Human beings are wired for control. The nervous system registers uncertainty as threat and responds by trying to reduce it, through planning, through prediction, through the management of outcomes and other people and future events. This drive is not pathological. In many contexts, it is genuinely useful, but it becomes a source of profound suffering when applied to things it cannot reach. You cannot control how other people feel about you, what decisions they make, how circumstances unfold, or what the future holds. Every minute spent trying to control these things is a minute of your life, spent on a project that cannot succeed. The liberating recognition, and it genuinely liberates, is that control was always limited to one domain: your own interior, your interpretations, your responses, your values, your attention. These are genuinely yours. Everything else is weather, and you cannot negotiate with weather. You can only decide how to dress. Silence as sanctuary. We live in a civilization that has declared war on silence. Every surface of modern life is covered in sound. Notifications, broadcasts, advertisements, conversations, the background hum of technology that never fully sleeps. The average person today is exposed to more information in a single day than a person in the 18th century would have encountered in a year. The cost of this exposure is invisible but immense. The mind, like any processing system, has a finite capacity. When that capacity is continuously overwhelmed by incoming data, something essential stops functioning properly. The capacity for deep thought, for genuine self-knowledge, for the kind of reflection that produces wisdom rather than just information. Silence is not empty. Silence is where the real work happens. When the external noise reduces, the interior becomes audible. The fears you've been too busy to examine, the desires you've been too distracted to acknowledge, the questions that have been waiting patiently for your attention. These don't disappear in silence. They arrive, sometimes uncomfortably, sometimes with great clarity. This is why silence initially feels unsettling to people who are unaccustomed to it. The mind, habituated to stimulation, registers its absence as a problem to be solved. The discomfort of stillness, the impulse to reach for the phone or turn on the television or fill the quiet with words, these are not signs that silence is bad for you. They are signs that it is doing exactly what it should, creating space for what you've been avoiding. Stay with the discomfort. It passes, and what comes after it is remarkable, a quality of inner hearing that is not available when the noise is running. Presence as practice. Peace lives exclusively in the present. This is not a poetic observation. It is a structural fact about human experience. The past, which exists only as memory, is where regret and grief tend to live. The future, which exists only as imagination, is where anxiety and worry tend to live. The present moment, this one, exactly here, is the only place where real experience actually occurs. And yet most of us spend the vast majority of our mental lives in one of the other two time zones: planning, replaying, projecting, ruminating, moving through physical space while our minds are somewhere else entirely. Practices that anchor attention to the present, mindfulness meditation, conscious breathing, deliberate sensory engagement, time spent in nature, are not spiritual luxuries. They are recalibrations of a navigation system that has drifted. They bring you back to the only place where life is actually happening. Notice what your hands feel right now, the temperature of the air in the room, the sounds within range of your hearing that you weren't tracking a moment ago, the weight of your body against whatever is supporting it. This is your life, this moment, Not the version you're planning for or the version you're concerned about. This one. And in this one, if you look carefully, there is almost always something that qualifies as okay. The power of patience. We live in the age of immediacy. Everything faster. Results now. Feedback instant. The gap between wanting and receiving has been compressed to the point where a delay of seconds feels like a provocation. And inside this culture of velocity, patience has begun to look like a character flaw, a failure of ambition, a lack of drive, an unwillingness to make things happen. This is one of the most costly misconceptions of modern life, because patience is not passivity. Patience is not the resignation of someone who has given up on outcomes. Patience is the deep, active trust that meaningful things require time to develop, and the willingness to remain present through the development without demanding that it happen faster than it can. Think of how anything genuinely substantial comes into being. A forest, a professional skill developed to real depth, a friendship that holds through genuine difficulty, a recovery from significant loss, a creative work that carries actual weight. None of these are fast. All of them require a quality of sustained engagement that cannot be hurried without being damaged. The seed doesn't become a tree by being pulled upward. It becomes a tree by receiving what it needs, consistently, over time, and by being allowed to develop at the pace its nature requires. The roots go down before the branches go up. The invisible work precedes the visible result, and the invisible work is not less important than the visible result. It is the foundation of it. Patience with yourself is where the practice begins. We are often far more compassionate with other people's pace than with our own. When a friend is struggling to change a deeply ingrained habit, we understand that change takes time. When a colleague is learning a new skill, we accept that proficiency doesn't arrive immediately. But when we ourselves fail to transform overnight, when the meditation practice lapses, when the new habit breaks down, when the emotional progress seems to reverse, we conclude that we are fundamentally incapable of change. This is not accurate. It is impatient. Every meaningful personal transformation follows a path that is neither straight nor fast. There are weeks of genuine progress followed by apparent setbacks. There are moments of real clarity followed by the return of old confusion. This is not failure. This is how change actually works, not as a clean linear ascent, but as a series of spiraling approaches to a new way of being, each cycle bringing you incrementally closer, even when it doesn't feel that way. The capacity to remain in this process without demanding that it resolve faster than it can, that is patience. And it is perhaps the most loving thing you can offer yourself. Patience as the interruption of comparison. One of the most reliable destroyers of patience is the comparison of your progress to someone else's timeline. Social media has made this comparison not just available, but inescapable. Someone your age has achieved what you're still working toward. Someone who started later has already arrived where you're still heading. The gap between their visible position and your current one feels like evidence of your failure. But this comparison is structurally dishonest. You are seeing someone else's highlight reel against your own behind-the-scenes footage. You are comparing their external outcome to your internal process. You are measuring two entirely different journeys with the same ruler, and then concluding that yours is the wrong length. Every life has its own timing. Some things bloom in spring, some things bloom in autumn. The cherry tree doesn't apologize for not being ready in January. The late-blooming magnolia doesn't conclude that it has failed because the early tulips are already done. Each has its season. Each is exactly on time for its own unfolding. Your life is on its own schedule. The work is to remain committed to that schedule without measuring it against timelines that were never designed for you. Patience with difficult emotions. One of patience's least discussed applications is in the domain of feeling. When a difficult emotion arrives, grief, fear, anger, shame, the instinctive response is to escape it as quickly as possible. To analyze it into submission, distract yourself away from it, replace it with something more comfortable. The modern toolkit for emotional escape is extraordinarily well developed and constantly available. But difficult emotions, like difficult seasons, have a natural duration. They carry information. They are trying to tell you something about what matters, what has been violated, what needs attention. When you escape them before they've finished speaking, you don't resolve them, you only postpone them. They return, sometimes in different forms, sometimes more insistently. Patience with your emotional experience means allowing difficult feelings to complete their natural arc, to arrive, to be felt, to move through and past, not dramatizing them, not suppressing them, simply being present to them with the knowledge that they, like everything, are temporary. This is not comfortable, but it is deeply settling, and it produces an emotional intelligence that escape never can. The long perspective. There is a quality of wisdom that only time can produce, not information. Information is now abundant beyond any historical precedent. Wisdom, the kind that comes from having lived through enough cycles to recognize the pattern, from having feared enough outcomes that didn't materialize to stop treating every threat as final, from having survived enough winters to know that spring is not optional. People with this perspective are not complacent. They are grounded. They move through difficulty with a steadiness that looks, from the outside, like extraordinary strength. But it is not strength in the ordinary sense. It is simply orientation. They know, from accumulated evidence, that this too shall pass. Not as a hopeful saying, but as a demonstrated reality. Patience is the practice of borrowing from this long perspective, even before your own experience has fully developed it, of reminding yourself, in the middle of the difficult thing, that you have survived difficult things before, that the current darkness does not define the final condition, that something is growing in you, even now, that will only be visible later. Trust the process that cannot yet be seen. This is patience at its most powerful, and its most quietly transformative, making peace with yourself. No matter where you go, no matter how thoroughly you rearrange your external circumstances, there is one companion you will never outrun: yourself. This is either a source of quiet terror or the beginning of everything. Most people are in some form of unresolved conflict with themselves, not a dramatic, visible conflict, but a chronic, low-grade internal war. On one side, the person they believe they should be: capable, composed, successful, certain, untroubled. On the other side, the person they actually are on a difficult Tuesday afternoon: uncertain, tired, occasionally petty, sometimes overwhelmed, frequently unsure. The distance between these two versions, between the performance and the reality, is one of the most exhausting things a human being can carry. It requires constant maintenance. The mask of fineness requires ongoing effort to keep in place. And beneath that effort, the actual self waits, unacknowledged, for someone to finally stop pretending. Making peace with yourself begins with a radical act of honesty, accepting that you are both more than your worst moments and less than your most idealized self, and that this is not a problem to be solved. It is the basic human condition. You have made mistakes. You will make more. You have said things you wish you could unsaid. You have chosen paths that didn't lead where you hoped. You have, in moments of fear or exhaustion or confusion, been less than the person you wanted to be. So has every human being who has ever lived. The project of being a person includes all of this. Failing to be perfect is not a personal failure. It is what it means to be alive. The inner voice that won't let you forget your failures, that rehearses your worst moments with the dedication of a film studio committed to a single terrible scene, is not serving your growth. It is serving nothing. Self-punishment is not a path to improvement. It is a trap dressed as conscience. Forgive yourself. Not in the sense of excusing what was genuinely harmful, not in the sense of avoiding accountability, but in the sense of releasing yourself from the sentence of perpetual self-prosecution for something that has already passed. You were someone earlier. You are someone now. The earlier someone made decisions with the understanding they had at the time. You have different understanding now. Give the earlier version of yourself the credit of being human, and move forward as the current version, which is also human and also doing its best. The relationship with your body. Modern culture has constructed an extraordinary machinery of dissatisfaction with the physical self. The beauty industry, the fitness industry, the wellness industry, all built in significant part on the foundation of the belief that your body, as it currently is not acceptable, that it requires correction, improvement, transformation before it qualifies. This is a lie that is being sold to you, and the cost of believing it, of spending years in low-grade hostility toward the body you actually live in, is a form of self-estrangement that runs deeper than it appears. Your body is not a project. It is not a problem. It is the vehicle through which you experience everything that has ever mattered to you, every person you've loved, every landscape that has moved you, every moment of joy you have ever felt. It has carried you through every difficulty you have survived. It wakes up every morning and does its work without requiring your gratitude. Begin there, with basic acknowledgement, with the recognition that your body, with all its imperfections and changes and limitations, deserves something better than your constant criticism. Listen to what it tells you. When it is tired, let it rest. When it is tense, move it. When it is hungry, feed it well. When it is asking for gentleness, provide it. These are not indulgences. This is the basic care that allows a human being to remain functional, present, and connected to their own life. The freedom of genuine self-knowledge. Making peace with yourself requires knowing yourself, not the version you perform for other people, not the version you aspire to become, but the actual current version, with full fidelity to its complexity. What genuinely energizes you? What systematically depletes you? Which relationships leave you feeling more like yourself, and which leave you feeling like a diminished version? What do you actually value? Not what you've been told to value, not what earns approval, but what you genuinely care about when the noise settles. These questions are not navel-gazing. They are the foundation of an authentic life. A person who doesn't know themselves cannot make decisions that align with who they actually are. They cannot build a life that fits. They will spend enormous energy pursuing things that satisfy other people's definitions of success, while their own definition remains unexamined. Self-knowledge is the ground of self-respect, and self-respect is the ground of peace. The art of letting go. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from holding too much. The resentment still lodged from a relationship that ended years ago. The guilt attached to a decision you made under circumstances that no longer exist. The identity built around a role you've outgrown. The expectation of how your life was supposed to look by now, held up against how it actually looks, creating a gap that is measured in daily disappointment. These are the things we carry. And we carry them not because they serve us, but because releasing them requires something we haven't yet found. The courage to stop defining ourselves by what has already passed. Letting go is not forgetting. It is not indifference. It is not the erasure of what was real. It is the decision that a particular thing, a memory, A grievance, an identity, an expectation will no longer be allowed to determine your present experience, that you will carry it forward as information, as history, as something that happened and shaped you, but not as something that continues to govern you. This distinction matters enormously. You can honor the significance of a loss without remaining in grief for the rest of your life. You can acknowledge the reality of a betrayal without spending your remaining years in the prison of bitterness. You can recognize that a path you once intended to walk is no longer your path, without concluding that you are therefore lost. The weight of accumulated resentment. Resentment is perhaps the heaviest of the things we carry unnecessarily. It feels, in its early stages, like a form of justice, a refusal to let someone off the hook for what they did. It feels like accountability, like self-respect. But resentment doesn't punish the person who wronged you. It punishes you. Every time the memory is activated, every time the old wound is reopened by a passing thought or an accidental reminder, you experience the injury again. The other person, in most cases, has moved on entirely. You are the only one still paying the toll. Forgiveness, in this context, is not a gift to the person who hurt you. It is a gift to yourself. It is the decision to stop making regular payments on a debt that shouldn't be yours. It is the releasing of a story that has been weighing down your present life with its past. This is not quick. Forgiveness of genuine injury is one of the more demanding practices available to a human being. It is arrived at gradually, sometimes over years, sometimes through grief that has to be fully felt before it can be fully released. There is no shortcut, but the destination is real, and it is worth the journey. Because what waits on the other side of genuine forgiveness is a lightness that is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't felt it, and instantly recognizable to anyone who has. Releasing outdated identities. One of the subtler but more significant forms of letting go is the releasing of identities you've outgrown. The roles that were assigned to you, perhaps by family, perhaps by early experience, perhaps by a version of yourself that existed before you knew what you know now. The responsible one, the strong one, the one who never asks for help, the person who always puts others first. These identities can feel like virtues, and perhaps they were. At some point in some context, they may have served real purposes, but when they become rigid, when they stop being choices and become compulsions, they become constraints. Who would you be if you weren't required to be the strong one? What would become available if you were allowed to not always have the answer? What space might open in your life if you let go of the story that your worth is tied to your usefulness to other people? These are not comfortable questions. They can feel like threats to something essential. But what they actually threaten is not your real self. They threaten the performance of a self that was never quite real to begin with, releasing expectations about how life should look. Perhaps the most pervasive form of unnecessary suffering is the chronic comparison between the life you have and the life you had scripted for yourself. By this age, this should have happened. By now, I should have achieved this. This is not how I imagined it would go. The life you imagined had the advantage of being entirely under your control, because it was imaginary. The life you are actually living has the inconvenience of being real, which means it has been shaped by forces beyond your scripting. Other people's choices, random circumstance, the simple reality that the world is not organized around the fulfillment of any individual's blueprint. Releasing the imagined life is not pessimism. It is not the abandonment of aspiration. It is the recognition that your actual life, this one with its unexpected detours and its unplanned arrivals and its surprising gifts and its genuine losses, is the only life you have, and that meeting it with full presence rather than half presence and half resentment of its failure to match the script, is the only path to actually living it. The beginning hidden inside every ending, every genuine letting go creates space. This is not metaphor. When you release something that has been occupying your attention, your energy, your emotional bandwidth, that space becomes available for something else, for something new, for something that could not have entered while the old thing was still filling its place. A relationship released after genuine grief creates the possibility of a different kind of connection. A career path released after real consideration creates the possibility of work that is more genuinely yours. An identity released after the discomfort of its dissolution creates the possibility of a self that is more fully authentic. You cannot add to a cup that is already full. The new cannot enter through a door that the old is still blocking. Letting go is not loss. It is preparation. Rebuilding from the inside out. There are periods in a life when the foundation cracks. Not always dramatically, sometimes quietly, incrementally, in ways that take years to fully register. You look up one day and realize that you don't recognize the person looking back at you. The things that used to matter have gone silent. The energy that used to sustain you has been depleted by something you can't quite name. You feel not simply tired, but hollowed out. This is not failure. This is not a sign that you are broken beyond repair. This is what a life under significant strain sometimes looks like. And it is, paradoxically, one of the most important moments available to any human being. Because crisis is also invitation. The collapse of what wasn't working is the first condition for building something that does. The rebuilding begins with honest acknowledgement, not performance, not the management of appearances, not the continuation of pretending that you are fine when you are not. Genuine acknowledgement. Something is not working. I need to look at this honestly. This is, in practice, more difficult than it sounds. We are trained from childhood to manage impressions, to present the functional version of ourselves, even when the functional version is largely fictional. The social cost of admitting that we are struggling feels high, and so we maintain the performance until maintaining it becomes impossible, until the weight of it forces a crisis that could have been a conversation. If you can begin the honest acknowledgement before the crisis, you will have more resources available for the rebuilding. But even in the middle of the crisis, even in the full collapse of what you thought you were and what you thought you had, the rebuilding is possible. It has always been possible. And it begins with the simple, courageous admission, I am not okay, and I am ready to look at why. Examining what you're building your days from. Your daily habits are not neutral. They are either feeding you or depleting you. The way you begin each morning, whether in anxious scrolling or in deliberate quiet, the quality of attention you bring to your meals, your conversations, your work, the content you consume, what it tells you about the world, about other people, about your own worth. The way you treat the hours between your commitments, as waste to be filled or as space to be inhabited. All of this is the raw material of your inner life. And if the raw material is consistently low quality, if your days are built primarily from anxiety, comparison, distraction, and the maintenance of appearances, then, regardless of your circumstances, your inner experience will reflect that. This doesn't require a dramatic overhaul. It requires honest examination, followed by small, consistent shifts. One practice replaced by another. One relationship given more attention, another given less. 1 hour of the day reclaimed for something that actually nourishes you. The cumulative effect of small, consistent shifts is transformation, not dramatic, not instant, but real and lasting. Rewriting the inner voice. The internal narrator that has been running in the background of your life is not fixed. It is a habit, and habits, by definition, can be changed. The voice that currently tells you that you are insufficient, that your best efforts aren't good enough, that your worth is conditional on your performance, this voice was not born with you. It was constructed, slowly, from absorbed messages and repeated experiences. It is real in the sense that you experience it, but it is not true in the sense that it accurately describes you. You can begin, gradually, to install a different voice. Not a voice that denies difficulty or pretends failure. Doesn't happen. A voice that responds to difficulty the way a genuinely good mentor would, with honesty, with perspective, with care, and with the fundamental assumption that you are capable of learning and growing and continuing. This new voice says, "This is hard, and I can navigate hard things." It says, "I made a mistake, and mistakes are how people learn." It says, "I don't know how this will turn out, and I can move forward anyway." These are not self-deceptions. They are accurate assessments delivered with the compassion that you have always deserved and rarely given yourself. The community of rebuilding. No one rebuilds alone. This is not weakness. It is biological truth. Human beings are wired for connection, and the capacity to recover from significant adversity is deeply correlated with the quality of our relationships, not the quantity, depth, not breadth. One person who genuinely sees you, who isn't frightened by your difficulty, who remains present without requiring you to perform recovery. That person is worth more to your rebuilding than 100 acquaintances offering comfortable platitudes. Allow yourself to be seen. Allow yourself to receive. The person who has spent years projecting invulnerability will find this difficult. The first honest conversation, the first genuine admission of struggle, will feel like exposure. But on the other side of that exposure is something that cannot be accessed any other way. Real connection. The kind that actually feeds you. The kind that makes rebuilding feel possible rather than merely theoretical. The person you are becoming. Rebuilding is not the restoration of what was. If what was needed rebuilding, restoring it, would only reproduce the problem. Rebuilding is the construction of something new, informed by everything you have learned, shaped by everything you have survived, but not limited by it. The person emerging from genuine rebuilding is different from the person who entered the difficulty. More honest about their actual needs, less willing to perform for an audience that doesn't see them, more capable of real intimacy because the performance has been retired, more grounded in what actually matters because the things that don't matter have been stripped away. This is not comfortable. The stripping away is painful. The uncertainty of new construction is disorienting. You will not always know what you are becoming while you are becoming it. You will have moments of profound doubt, moments when the old version seems safer, more familiar, more manageable than this uncertain new territory. Stay with the uncertainty. It is not your enemy. It is the condition in which growth occurs, the life waiting on the other side. You are not the sum of your worst experiences. You are not the collection of your failures. You are not the distance between where you are and where you thought you would be by now. You are a human being, complex, flawed, resilient, capable, perpetually in the process of becoming, and the story of your life is still being written. Every chapter that has felt like an ending has, so far, been a transition. Every moment that felt like a final judgment has turned out to be a turning point. Happiness is not the reward that arrives when you have finally gotten everything right. It is the quality of presence you bring to your actual life, the one you have, not the one you scripted. It is the capacity to find something real and true and worth honoring in the present moment, whatever its imperfections. It is the practice of returning again and again to the knowledge that you are enough to handle what is in front of you, not because you have proof in advance, but because you have proof in retrospect. You have already survived everything that once seemed unsurvivable. You are already more than you were. And the work of becoming, quiet, difficult, unglamorous, extraordinary, continues. Begin again, right here, right now, not when you feel ready, not when the circumstances improve, not when the voice inside finally stops questioning you. Now, exactly as you are, with everything unresolved and everything uncertain and everything imperfect, because the secret that every genuinely happy person has discovered, the one that no amount of achievement or accumulation can teach, is simply this: the life you are waiting for is the one you are already living, and it is enough. You are enough, and from this place, everything that matters can be built.